I need to tell you about the boot before I tell you about anything else. Because the boot is the part that still hasn't been explained, and I think if I start anywhere else, I'll arrange this story in a way that makes it sound like I understood what was happening while it was happening. I didn't. I was terrified and confused. And I was operating on 4 hours of sleep and the kind of adrenaline that doesn't make you sharp. It makes you functional in a way that feels like sharpness, until you stop moving and realize you can't remember what you ate for the last 2 days. The boot was a men's size 11 Danner work boot, brown leather, left foot only, standing upright on the gravel floor of a disused rail tunnel in Tucker County, West Virginia, approximately 300 feet from the eastern portal. It was unlaced, it was dry, it was standing there like someone had stepped out of it mid-stride and kept walking. I found it on a Tuesday night in late February while looking for my brother, and as of today, it has not been matched to any known person. I need to say that again, because it matters. The boot does not belong to my brother. It does not belong to any of the 4 people I eventually identified who had gone into that tunnel and come out wrong. It does not belong to any hiker, any trespasser, any railway worker whose name appears in any record the county or the railroad has produced. It is a boot that belongs to someone who went into Blackwater Tunnel, and that someone has not been found, and nobody was looking for them because nobody knew they were gone. After all, the call they may have made, if they made one, was never logged. That boot is the reason I'm telling this story in this particular way. Not because it's the most dramatic detail, because it's the detail that proves the record is still incomplete. I found 4 missing calls. There may be a 5th. There may be more. Dale Reese had access to that system for 13 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Nora Fenton. I'm 37. I work for the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality in Charlottesville, processing permit applications for stormwater discharge and land disturbance. It is exactly as unglamorous as it sounds, and I'm telling you what I do because it matters for understanding how I eventually pulled the thread that unraveled this. I'm not an investigator. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a person who reads county filings and regulatory submissions 8 hours a day and has developed, over 11 years of doing that work, an instinct for when a paper trail has a gap in it that shouldn't be there. I notice missing pages. It's not a skill I'm proud of in any particular way. It's just what happens when your entire professional life is spent looking at documents that are supposed to be complete and checking whether they actually are. I grew up in Blackwater, not Blackwater the tunnel. Blackwater the place, which is less a town than a scattering of houses and trailers along Route 7 in the Blackwater River drainage of Tucker County, West Virginia. My mother, Maura Fenton, lived there her entire life. My father died when I was 14, a heart attack on a logging road, dead before anyone reached him. I left for college at 18 and didn't come back except for holidays, and then not even for those. My brother Ellis, 2 years younger than me, left a year after I did, went to Morgantown, got a job with a flooring company, and built a life that had nothing to do with Tucker County. We weren't estranged from our mother. We just weren't there. She didn't hold it against us. She was a practical woman who understood that the kids who stay in places like Blackwater are the kids who don't have options, and she'd made sure we had options. She died in January. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed in October, was gone by the new year. Ellis and I took turns being there in her final weeks. We held her hands. We told her we loved her. We signed the hospice paperwork, and the funeral paperwork, and the cremation paperwork, and then we stood in her kitchen and looked at 43 years of accumulated living, and neither of us knew where to start. Ellis volunteered to go back first and begin sorting the estate. He drove down from Morgantown the second week of February with a truck full of boxes and garbage bags, and a notarized copy of the will, which was simple. Everything split evenly, house to be sold. He told me he'd need 2 weeks, maybe 3. I told him I'd come down the following weekend to help. He called me every evening for the first 4 days. Normal calls. Boring calls. He talked about the state of the roof, the mice in the basement, and the neighbor who'd brought a casserole that was mostly cream of mushroom soup. On the fifth day, he called and said he'd been driving around, revisiting places from when we were kids, and he'd found the old tunnel on the Norfolk Southern Spur off Route 7. I remembered the tunnel. Every kid in Blackwater knew it. It was a single-bore rail tunnel cut through a ridge of Devonian sandstone in 1931 to connect the coal operations in the drainage to the main line at Hendricks. It carried coal for 5 decades. When the mines closed, the railroad kept the spur nominally active for maintenance access, ran a train through once or twice a year to keep the right-of-way legal, and then finally gave it up. Norfolk Southern decommissioned the spur in 2014. The rails were pulled out in 2016, but the roadbed was left intact. Crushed limestone ballast on a graded surface that ran straight into the hillside and came out the other end 1,100 feet later. A chain-link gate had been installed across the eastern portal by the county as a liability measure. It was the kind of gate that says, "We put a gate here," rather than the kind that actually stops anyone. When we were kids, we used to dare each other to walk into the tunnel. The dare was always the same. Go in until you can't see the entrance behind you. Stand in total darkness for a count of 10, then come back. I did it once when I was 12. The darkness in that tunnel is not like nighttime darkness, or closet darkness, or any darkness you experience in a world that has ambient light. It is complete. It is so total that your eyes begin producing their own light, little phosphine sparks that your brain manufactures because it cannot accept the input of nothing. I counted to 10, and I ran back, and I never did it again. Ellis, on that 5th night, told me he'd gone up to the tunnel and walked around the pull-off where the gravel spur meets Route 7, and looked at the portal, and felt nostalgic. He said the gate had been cut open. Someone had taken bolt cutters to it years ago, by the look of the rust, and he'd thought about going inside, but decided against it because he didn't have a flashlight. "I might go back tomorrow with a light," he said. "Just to see. Be careful." I said, which is the kind of thing you say when you don't actually think there's anything to be careful about. That was a Wednesday. He didn't call on Thursday. He didn't call on Friday. I texted him Saturday morning and got no response. I called Saturday afternoon, and it went to voicemail. I called Sunday morning, and it went to voicemail again. This time, I called 3 more times in a row, and each time it rang 5 times and went to voicemail. By the 4th call, I was standing in my apartment in Charlottesville, with my coat already on because I knew something was wrong. The drive from Charlottesville to Blackwater is 4 hours and 50 minutes if you don't stop. I stopped once, for gas in Staunton, and I tried him again from the pump, and got voicemail. And I drove the rest of the way at 80, and didn't slow down until I hit the 2-lane roads in Randolph County, where the curves get tight enough to kill you. I got to my mother's house at 10:30 at night. The lights were off. Ellis's truck was not in the driveway. The front door was locked. I used my key. Inside, everything looked normal. His duffel bag was on the couch in the living room. His phone charger was plugged into the wall in the kitchen with no phone attached to it. A half-finished cup of coffee sat on the counter with a skin of mold on it. The mold is what got me. Mold like that takes days. He hadn't been in this house in days. I drove to the tunnel. I don't know why I went there first instead of calling the police. That's not true. I do know. I went there because the tunnel was the last thing he'd mentioned wanting to visit, and because I am not someone who calls for help before I have information. That's a flaw, probably. It's the way I'm built. I gather data first. I assess. Then I act. It has served me well in permit review and served me poorly in relationships, and I cannot seem to change it. The pull-off on Route 7 is a flat gravel area where the old spur access road meets the highway. It's maybe 40 feet wide, enough for a few vehicles. Ellis's truck was there. The driver's door was open. The cab light was dead. The battery had been drained by the dome light running for however long the door had been open. I looked inside. His keys were in the ignition. His Red Wing boots, the brown lace-ups he'd worn every day since he was 25, were on the floor of the passenger side. His phone was not in the truck. His wallet was on the center console. I stood there in the dark, and I looked at the tunnel portal. It was about 200 feet from the pull-off, down a gentle slope where the spur grade descends into the hillside. The chain-link gate was hanging open, one side peeled back, orange with rust. Beyond it, the tunnel mouth was a black semicircle cut into gray rock. I could feel air moving out of it, cold, damp, with a mineral smell like wet concrete. I had a flashlight in my car, a good one, a streamlight I keep in the glove box. I got it. I zipped my coat, and I called 911. The woman who answered was professional and calm. I told her my name. I told her my brother was missing. I told her his truck was at the Route 7 pull-off near the old Norfolk Southern Tunnel with the door open, his wallet inside and his boots on the floor. I told her I believed he had entered the tunnel and not come out. She asked me when I had last spoken to him. I said Wednesday. She asked me if I wanted to file a missing persons report. I said yes. She asked me if I could stay at the location until a unit arrived. I said yes. She told me someone would be dispatched. I waited. I want to describe the quality of that waiting because it is important. It was February. It was maybe 25 degrees. The sky was clear, and the stars were the kind of stars you only see in places without light pollution. Thick and close, the Milky Way visible as a bright smear across the entire southern sky. Route 7 was empty. Number cars passed in either direction for the entire time I stood there. The only sounds were the creek below the road, the wind in the bare hardwoods on the ridge above me, and occasionally, from inside the tunnel, a sound that I told myself was water dripping from the ceiling onto the gravel floor, but that did not have the regularity of dripping water. 40 minutes. I timed it because I was looking at my phone. 40 minutes and no one came. I want to be clear about what I did next and why. I did not go into the tunnel because I was brave. I went into the tunnel because 40 minutes is a very long time when your brother's truck is sitting in front of you, with the door open and his boots inside, and you are alone on a road in the county where you grew up, and the people whose job it is to come when you call have not come. I went in because I had a flashlight, and because I am Nora Fenton, and I have been solving my own problems since I was 14 years old. And I was not going to stand in a parking lot until sunrise, waiting for a deputy who might never arrive. The tunnel floor was dry crushed limestone. My boots crunched on it. The sound echoed in a way that made it seem like someone was walking behind me, which they were not. I checked multiple times. The walls were rough-cut sandstone, damp, with streaks of mineral deposit that caught the flashlight beam and threw it back in faint orange lines. The ceiling was arched maybe 15 feet at the center, and I could see my breath in the light. I swept the beam ahead of me in slow arcs. I was looking for Ellis, or for signs of Ellis. I was looking for anything. 300 feet in, I'm estimating based on the length of the tunnel and how far I felt I'd walked, the beam caught something on the ground. A boot. A single boot. Left foot. Men's size. Brown leather Dannerwork boot, standing upright on the gravel as if someone had set it there with care. It was unlaced. It was not muddy. It was not damaged. It was just standing there. My first thought was that it was Ellis's. My second thought, which came almost immediately, was that it couldn't be because Ellis's boots were in his truck. I'd seen them. I'd registered them specifically because it was strange. Who walks away from their truck without shoes in February? I picked the boot up. It was cold. It was stiff. It smelled like leather and stone. I turned it over. The sole was worn smooth in the heel, the way boots get when you've walked a lot of pavement. The interior had no insole. It had been removed or had deteriorated. There was no name written inside, no marking, nothing to identify who it belonged to. I set it down. I kept going. The tunnel continued ahead of me, featureless. At some point, maybe 500 feet in, maybe more, I stopped. Not because I'd found something, but because I'd realized something. The air had changed. Not the temperature, which had been steadily cold the entire time. The moisture. When I'd entered, the air was damp but breathable, the way a basement feels. Now it was saturated. I could feel it on my face, in my throat. My flashlight beam, which had been cutting clean arcs through the dark, was now diffusing, catching on water vapor like high beams in fog. I pointed the light at the floor. Dry gravel. I pointed it at the walls. Damp stone, the same as before but with a faint sheen now, like condensation. I pointed it at the ceiling. Dripping. Not the irregular drip I'd heard from outside. A steady, distributed seep, as if the entire ceiling were sweating. I called Ellis's name. The echo was enormous. It bounced off the walls in overlapping waves that made my own voice unrecognizable by the time it came back to me. No answer. I called again. Nothing. I kept going until I estimated I was about 2/3 through, maybe 700 feet. And then I stopped because I heard something that I cannot adequately describe. But I'm going to try. It was a low sound, not mechanical, not vocal. It was the sound of volume, a large amount of something shifting in a large space. The closest comparison I can make is this. If you've ever stood on a lake shore at night and heard the ice move, that deep, structural sound of mass adjusting itself, it was like that, but wetter. Like a body of water turning over somewhere below me or ahead of me. Somewhere close enough that I could feel the vibration in the soles of my boots, but far enough away that the sound had no clear direction. I stood still for a long time. Maybe 2 minutes. The sound did not repeat. I decided to go back. This was not courage leaving me. This was the data-gathering part of my brain, telling me that I had exceeded the information I could usefully collect alone, in the dark, without knowing what I was dealing with. I turned around and walked back toward the eastern portal and emerged into the cold, starlit air. And Ellis's truck was still sitting there with the door open, and I stood in the gravel pull-off and realized that no one had come. No deputy. No response. Nothing. My 911 call was 55 minutes old. I drove back to my mother's house. I did not sleep. I sat in the kitchen with the lights on, and I called 911 again. And this time I got a different operator, R, and I went through the entire process again. And this time, the operator said a unit would be dispatched at first light, because overnight availability in the county was limited. I asked her if there was a record of my earlier call. She checked. She said she didn't see one. I want to be careful about what I assumed at that point. I did not assume malice. I assumed a rural county dispatch system that was overtaxed, understaffed, and running on infrastructure that hadn't been updated since the 90s. I assumed my call had been dropped, or misfiled, or logged under the wrong category, and therefore invisible to the second operator. I was annoyed. I was frightened for my brother. But I was not suspicious. Not yet. At 7:40 the next morning, Wednesday, a Tucker County deputy named Brian Walters called me and told me my brother had been located walking along a Forest Service fire road above the western portal of the tunnel. He was disoriented and dehydrated, but ambulatory. He was being taken by ambulance to Davis Memorial Hospital in Elkins. I drove to Elkins. The drive is an hour and 14 minutes from Blackwater, and I made it in under an hour. And I am not proud of that, but I am not going to pretend I obeyed the speed limit. I parked at the hospital. I went through the emergency department entrance. A nurse took me to a room. Ellis was sitting on the edge of a hospital bed in a paper gown with an IV in his left arm. He looked pale and thin, and his lips were chapped, and he had abrasions on his palms and forearms, consistent with falling on rough ground. He looked at me and said, "Nora, I'm sorry I scared you." He knew who I was. He knew where he was. He knew what day it was. The doctor, a young woman named Patel who radiated the kind of competence that makes you feel safe even when you shouldn't, told me he had a mild concussion, moderate dehydration, and superficial abrasions. She said he'd told them he went into the tunnel to explore, slipped on the loose ballast, hit his head, became disoriented in the dark, and eventually found his way out the western portal and walked until someone spotted him on the fire road and called it in. The explanation was clear. It was plausible. It had the structural completeness of a story that answers every question it raises, and leaves no room for further inquiry. Ellis slipped, hit his head, got lost and found his way out. Case closed. The doctor's face said case closed. The discharge paperwork said case closed. Ellis, sitting on the bed in his hospital socks, squeezing my hand, saying, "Can we just go deal with Mom's house?" His face said case closed, and I closed the case. I want to be honest about that. I let the relief be bigger than the questions. I drove my brother back to Blackwater. I stopped at the pull-off on Route 7, and we got his truck started with a jump from my car. I followed him back to Mom's house. We spent the afternoon doing what we'd come here to do. Sorting kitchen drawers, bagging up clothes for Goodwill, arguing gently about whether to keep the cast iron or let it go. Ellis moved slowly, but he moved. He made coffee, he ate a sandwich, he laughed at a photograph he found in a drawer of our father holding a smallmouth bass that was clearly under the legal limit, grinning like he'd caught a marlin. Normal things. The texture of normal life. I started mentally composing the email I'd send to my supervisor in Charlottesville. Back by Friday. Family matter resolved. Thank you for your patience. I could feel the shape of my regular life waiting for me. My apartment, my desk, my stack of permits, my Tuesday evening pottery class that I'd started going to because a therapist told me I needed a hobby that involved my hands. Then, at dinner, Ellis said, "Has the tunnel always had water in it?" We were sitting at Mom's kitchen table, eating spaghetti I'd made from a jar of sauce I'd found in the pantry that was almost certainly too old. But neither of us had the energy to go to the store. I had a fork halfway to my mouth. I set it down. "Water?" I said. "In the tunnel. When I was in there was water." "What do you mean water?" "Water on the floor. Deep. It was up to my chest." I looked at him. His face was not the face of someone making a joke or being imprecise. It was the face of someone stating something they were completely certain about and slightly confused that it needed stating. "Ellis, I was in that tunnel last night. The floor was dry. It's crushed gravel. There was no water." He frowned, not confused, certain. It was cold. I could feel the current. It was moving, like a stream. I was trying to keep my footing, and I couldn't because the floor was uneven under the water, and I couldn't see anything. There's no water source that feeds into. Nora, I was in the water. I could feel things moving past my legs. Sticks, debris. I don't know. It was pitch dark, and the water was up to my chest, and it was cold enough that my hands stopped working. He said this with his hands around a coffee mug in our dead mother's kitchen, and I want you to understand the quality of his certainty. This was not someone guessing. This was not someone embellishing. My brother is a man who installs hardwood floors for a living. He measures things to the 32nd of an inch. He does not traffic in exaggeration. When he tells me the water was up to his chest, the water was up to his chest. "The doctor said you had a concussion," I said carefully. "The concussion was from falling in the water. I slipped on the gravel when the water hit me. It came up fast, Nora. It wasn't there when I walked in. I was maybe 5 minutes into the tunnel, and it rose, like something had been released upstream. Like a dam broke. There's no dam. There's no upstream. The tunnel goes through a sandstone ridge. It's not connected to any surface water. I'm telling you what happened to me." We sat in silence for a while. I could hear the kitchen faucet dripping, the same faucet that had dripped when we were kids, that our mother had never fixed because she said the sound kept her company. Then I said, "What about your boots? What about them? Your boots were in the truck. You walked into that tunnel without boots." He looked down at his feet. "Hospital socks." He thought about it. "I was wearing sneakers," he said. "The gray New Balances. I changed out of my boots at the truck because the ground was muddy on the pull-off and I didn't want to trash my good boots. I hadn't seen sneakers in the truck. I'd seen his red wings on the passenger floor. No sneakers. Where are the sneakers now?" "I don't know. I lost them in the water. Ellis, you told the doctor you slipped on gravel and hit your head." Because that's the version that makes sense. That's the version where I slipped and fell and got confused and walked out the other side. The version with the water. Who was I going to tell that to? The doctor? What would she do with that? He wasn't angry. He was tired. He was the specific kind of tired that comes from holding two versions of an event in your head simultaneously. The one you experienced and the one that's possible, and having already decided which one other people will accept. He'd triaged his own story in the ambulance. Concussion. Disorientation. That's all anyone needed. I thought I was going to die in there, Nora, he said quietly. I need you to know that. It wasn't a bump on the head. I was in water in total darkness, and I couldn't find the walls, and I couldn't feel the floor. And I thought I was going to die. The faucet dripped. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a dog barked somewhere up the hollow, and then stopped, and the silence afterward was the specific silence of a place where nobody is coming to check on you. I asked him about the boot. What boot? When I went into the tunnel looking for you, I found a boot, a left Danner work boot, standing upright on the gravel maybe 300 feet in. It wasn't yours. I didn't see a boot. I didn't see anything. It was dark. It was standing upright, like someone had stepped out of it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Whose was it?" I didn't know. I didn't know anything. I knew my brother had gone into a dry tunnel and experienced deep water. I knew I'd called 911, and no one had come, and the call had not been recorded. I knew there was a boot in that tunnel that didn't belong to anyone I could identify, and I knew that the neat story we'd been given, slipped, hit his head, walked out, was not what had happened. I did not go back to Charlottesville on Friday. Instead, on Thursday morning, I went to the Tucker County Sheriff's Office in Parsons and spoke with Deputy Walters again. He was polite. He was professional in the way that small county deputies are professional, which is to say he treated me with careful courtesy while very clearly wanting to move on to something else. I told him I'd called 911 on Tuesday night and that no one had responded. He checked the system. He said there was no record of a call from my number to Tucker County 911 on that date. My phone log shows a completed call, I said. 3 minutes, 20 seconds. He looked at his screen. He looked at me. He said, "Systems drop calls sometimes, ma'am. It's an old setup. Can you check the audit trail? See if there's a voided record?" He didn't know what I meant by audit trail. I explained. He said he'd have to talk to his supervisor. I asked who his supervisor was for dispatch-related issues. He said the dispatch system was overseen by the county's emergency management coordinator. I asked for the name. Dale Reese, he said. I wrote the name down in a pocket notebook I'd bought at the Dollar General on Route 32, because my phone battery was becoming a strategic resource I needed to conserve. I thanked Deputy Walters. I left. Then I went to get lunch, because I was hungry and because I'd learned a long time ago that thinking is better on a full stomach. There's a pizza shop on Route 32 called Mountaineer Pizza that has been there since at least the mid-90s. When I was a kid, my mother used to take us there on Fridays. The pizza is fine. The breadsticks are good. The building smells like dough and cleaning solution in a way that is specific to every small-town pizza shop in America. The woman behind the counter was maybe 50, with short gray streaked hair and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. Her name tag said Cheryl. I ordered 2 slices and a Coke and sat at one of the 4 tables along the window, and she brought the food over herself, which is normal in a place where the counter person is also the server, the cook, and also the person who locks up at night. She lingered for a moment and then said, "You're Maura Fenton's girl, aren't you?" Not a question, a recognition. In a place like Tucker County, faces carry lineage. I look enough like my mother that anyone who knew her would see it. "I'm Nora," I said. "I'm Cheryl Mans. I knew your mama from church. I was sorry to hear about her passing." "Thank you." She stood there. She had the look of someone working up to something. I've seen it 1,000 times. In public comment periods, in permit hearings, at community meetings where someone has a piece of information they've been sitting on for too long, and they need the smallest opening to release it. "Is your brother all right?" she asked. "He's fine. He had a scare, but he's fine." "Up at the tunnel?" I put my pizza down. "How did you know that?" "Because my son went into that tunnel in 2019, and he came out 2 days later walking along Route 72 with no shoes on, and he couldn't tell me where he'd been. He still can't." She sat down across from me. She didn't ask if she could. She just sat, the way you sit when the conversation you've been wanting to have for 6 years has finally arrived, and you are not going to let politeness slow it down. "His name is Gavin," she said. "He was 17. He went in on a dare. Some friends from school, a summer evening. You know how boys are. His friends waited at the entrance. He didn't come back. They called his father. His father called 911. Someone answered. His father described the situation. A missing teenager, Blackwater Tunnel, had been gone for over an hour. They said they'd send someone, and no one came." I said. She looked at me. "That happened to you." "Tuesday night, I called about Ellis. They said they'd dispatch someone. Nobody came. And when I checked the next day, there was no record of my call." Her fingers were short and strong, the hands of someone who has kneaded dough and wrung mops and held a frightened child's face in her palms. She pressed them flat and held them there, and I could see her organizing herself, deciding how much to say and how to say it. "My husband's phone records show he made that call," she said. "I have the bill. Completed call, 3 minutes 41 seconds to Tucker County 911. When I tried to get the recording, Gavin was missing for 2 days. I was looking at a lawsuit against the county for that gate. The gate was their responsibility, and it was wide open. They told me no call was received that evening from that number. That's exactly what happened to me. It's not a coincidence, honey. It's Dale Reese." That was the first time I heard the name from someone other than Deputy Walters, and the way she said it, not with anger, not with fear, but with the flat declarative weight of someone who has carried a conclusion for years and been unable to put it down, told me everything about the distance between what she knew and what she could prove. She told me the rest over the next half hour while the pizza cooled and no other customers came in. She told me that Gavin had been found by a hiker on Route 72, barefoot, walking steadily in one direction, with no apparent distress, but also no apparent awareness of where he was. She told me the hospital in Elkins had found nothing physically wrong with him, except dehydration and mild hypothermia, despite it being July. She told me Gavin was fine now, worked at a garage in Davis, drove his own truck, had friends, paid his bills, but that he could not describe what had happened inside the tunnel. Not wouldn't, couldn't. The words were not available to him. A psychiatrist in Morgantown had diagnosed dissociative amnesia, which is a clinical way of saying his brain had locked a door and hidden the key. "I asked him once if there was water," Cheryl said. "I'd heard a rumor from someone, I don't even remember who, about water in the tunnel. He just looked at me. He opened his mouth and closed it, like he was trying to reach something that wasn't there." She told me about Dale Reese. She told me he'd been Tucker County's emergency management coordinator since 2011. She told me he oversaw the county's dispatch infrastructure, had administrative access to the CAD system, and was responsible for records management and quality control of the 9/11 log. She told me he was married to a woman named Linda Voss, whose uncle, Connor Voss, owned the mineral rights under the ridge that Blackwater Tunnel passes through. "Connor Voss has been trying to get that tunnel delisted as a transportation asset for 10 years, Cheryl said. "If it's delisted, the easement goes away, and he can lease the timber rights on the ridge without the railroad's consent. It's worth real money. Not millions, but hundreds of thousands. Enough to matter, and if 911 calls about the tunnel go into the county record. Then the county has a documented liability. They have to inspect it. They have to assess it. They have to either secure it or convert it. Any of that requires formally acknowledging that it's a county concern, and the moment it's a county concern, the easement evaluation starts, and Connor Voss's plans get complicated. So Dale deletes the calls. I can't prove it. I've been saying this for 6 years, and I can't prove it because the calls aren't there. My phone bill says I'm right. The county system says I'm a liar. How many calls? I asked. Mine. Yours now. And I've heard rumors about at least 2 others, but I don't have names. She leaned forward. You need to talk to Dale Reese, she said. And you need to understand what you're talking to before you open your mouth. He's been in emergency services in this county for 30 years. Everybody knows him. Everybody trusts him. He's the guy who shows up when the river floods and helps sandbag the fire hall. He's the guy who does the emergency preparedness presentation at the elementary school every fall with the little coloring book about what to do in a tornado. You go after him with a theory about deleted 911 calls and no proof. You're the outsider who left and came back with an agenda. He knows that. He's counting on it. I sat with that for a while. I ate my cold pizza. I thought about my mother, who had lived in this county her entire life and trusted the systems that served her without ever asking how they worked. Because why would she? Because that was the whole point of systems. You weren't supposed to have to watch them. I'm not going to talk to him, I said. Not yet. I'm going to get the proof first. Cheryl looked at me the way my mother used to look at me when I said I was going to do something difficult, and she believed me. She said, "What do you need?" I told her I needed the names of the other 2 callers, and I needed every piece of paper she had about Gavin's disappearance. Hospital records, phone records, any correspondence with the county. She said she'd make calls. I spent the rest of Thursday afternoon at the Tucker County Public Library in Parsons, which has 4 desktop computers with internet access, and a librarian named Helen, who remembered me from when I was 11, and playing Oregon Trail on these same machines, though the machines have obviously been replaced several times since then. I pulled county records, property filings, deed transfers, mineral rights registrations, and easement agreements, all public records, all accessible through the county clerk's online portal, which is clunky and slow and runs on what appears to be a web framework from 2009, but it contains everything if you know how to search it. I found Connor Voss in the Mineral Rights Registry. He held subsurface rights on 3 parcels along the ridge, including the one directly above Blackwater Tunnel. I found the Norfolk Southern decommissioning filing from 2014, which transferred surface maintenance responsibility for the tunnel structure to the county, pending an evaluation for potential conversion to recreational use. I found the county commission minutes from 2015 where the evaluation was discussed and deferred. I found the minutes from 2016, where it was discussed and deferred again. I found the minutes from 2017, where it was not discussed at all. I found no mention of the tunnel in any county commission minutes from 2018 to the present. The tunnel had disappeared from the institutional conversation. It still existed physically, 1,100 feet of stone, and darkness and whatever was inside it. But on paper, it had become nothing. No evaluation, no status report, no maintenance record, no incident log. The gate was the last official action the county had taken regarding the Blackwater Tunnel, and the gate had been breached for years. I also pulled Dale Reese's appointment record. He'd been named Emergency Management Coordinator by the County Commission in 2011 by a 3-0 vote. His reappointments in 2015, 2019, and 2023 were similarly unanimous. His salary was listed in the annual budget at $47,000. His responsibilities, as described in the county code, included oversight of the Emergency Operations Plan, coordination with state and federal emergency management agencies, and, here it was, in the bland bureaucratic language that hides everything important, management and quality assurance of the county's public safety communications infrastructure, including the computer-aided dispatch system. He had the keys to the filing cabinet. He'd been given them by the county commission, and he'd been using them to remove the drawers that connected his wife's family to a liability. I printed everything. 53 pages. I put them in a manila folder I bought at Dollar General. I drove back to Blackwater. Ellis was sitting on the front porch in the dark, which is something he used to do as a teenager, and which I hadn't seen him do in 15 years. "You're not going back to Charlottesville, are you?" he said. "No. Because of the tunnel. Because someone deleted my 911 call, Ellis, and yours wasn't the first time. It's been happening since at least 2019. Maybe longer." He was quiet for a while. A screech owl called from the woods above the house. That strange descending whinny that sounds like a question. "I keep feeling the water," he said. "When I close my eyes, I can feel it against my chest. I know." "The doctor said there wasn't any water. The doctor said you had a concussion." She didn't say there wasn't water. She said what she could see, which was the concussion, the dehydration, and the abrasions. She didn't go into the tunnel. Nobody went into the tunnel. That's the whole point, isn't it? Nobody ever goes into the tunnel, because nobody ever gets sent to the tunnel. After all, the calls don't exist. He understood it faster than I did. He'd been inside it. He knew what it meant to call for help and have the record of your calling taken away. Not in the abstract, policy analysis way I understood it, but in the physical, cellular way of having been in cold, dark water up to his chest believing he was going to die, and knowing now that the people who should have come for him were never told he needed them. On Friday morning, Cheryl called. She had two names. The first was Roy Pruitt, 61 years old, who lived on a farm outside Davis. In October 2021, his German Shepherd had bolted off the porch during a thunderstorm, run down Route 7, and gone into the tunnel. Roy had followed. He'd called 911 from the pull-off, told them his dog was in the tunnel, and asked if someone could bring a spotlight because his flashlight batteries were dying. Someone answered. Completed call, 2 minutes 50 seconds. No record in the county system. Roy went in after the dog. He came out 7 hours later. He remembers going in. He remembers the dog barking, distant, somewhere ahead of him. He does not remember the next 7 hours. He was found sitting on the ballast inside the eastern portal. Not outside, inside maybe 20 feet in. By a runner who passed the pull-off at dawn and saw his truck. The dog was beside him, wet. It was not raining. There was no water in the tunnel. The dog had been wet. The second name was Della Simmons, 44, who had moved to Parsons after the incident. In July 2023, her daughter Madison, 15 years old, had gone into the tunnel with two friends on a Saturday afternoon. The friends had come back out after a few minutes. Madison had not. The friends called Della. Della called 911. Completed call, 4 minutes 12 seconds. No record. Madison was found the next morning on the fire road above the western portal. She was hypothermic. In July. In West Virginia. In 80-degree heat. She was soaking wet. Her core temperature at the hospital was 94 degrees. She told the doctors she'd been in water. They noted it as confusion secondary to hypothermia. Nobody asked what water. Madison was 16 now. Cheryl said she was in school. Cheryl said she woke up screaming about the cold. I drove to see Roy Pruitt on Friday afternoon. He lived at the end of a gravel road that wound up a hillside through scrubby second-growth forest and ended at a farmhouse with a metal roof and a porch that sagged in the middle like a hammock. He was a big man, broad across the chest, with the rough hands and patient face of someone who has spent his life doing outdoor work. His dog, the same dog, older now with a gray muzzle, lay on the porch and watched me with calm, disinterested eyes. Roy was not eager to talk. He was not hostile. He was the particular kind of reluctant that I recognized from dealing with landowners at DEQ. The reluctance of someone who has had an experience that made them feel foolish and does not want to feel foolish again in front of a stranger. I told him why I was there. I told him about Ellis. I told him about Gavin Mans. I told him about the deleted calls. I watched his face change as I talked. Not dramatically, not a movie-style revelation, but a slow loosening, like a fist unclenching. I told my wife I blacked out, he said. I told her the stress of the dog running off and the thunderstorm caused some kind of episode. She took me to the doctor. The doctor said it was possible. Stress-related syncope. I let it stand, because what was I going to say? I lost 7 hours in a tunnel, and I don't know where they went. Was there water, Roy? He looked at his dog. The dog looked back at him. I don't remember being in water, he said. But the dog was wet when they found us. Soaking wet. And I was dry. And it wasn't raining. Your 911 call. Did anyone come? No. Nobody came. And when I tried to follow up, I was going to complain, my dog's in a tunnel and nobody shows up. I called the non-emergency line, and they said they had no record of a 911 call from my number that evening. What did you do? Nothing. What was I going to do? My dog came back. I came back, I was embarrassed. I dropped it. Can you get your phone records from October 2021? I can call Verizon, I suppose. Please do. I'm building a file. He looked at me with an expression I'd seen before on Cheryl's face, the expression of someone who has been carrying something alone for years and has just been told they don't have to. You know about Dale Reese? He asked. I know. Everybody in this county knows Dale. He's a good man. Or he acts like one. I don't know the difference anymore. I drove to Parsons and spoke with Della Simmons by phone from Cheryl's kitchen table. Della was sharper, angrier, less willing to second-guess herself. She had retained a lawyer after Madison's hypothermia incident. The lawyer had requested the 911 records. The county had responded that no call was received. The lawyer had obtained Della's phone records showing the completed call. The lawyer had written a letter to the county commission raising the discrepancy. The county commission had responded that CAD system malfunctions were not uncommon, and that the county was upgrading its communications infrastructure, which was a sentence that managed to sound responsive without actually responding to anything. The lawyer had advised Della that without the 911 recording or dispatch record, she had no actionable case. Della had moved to Parsons because she couldn't stand driving past the tunnel on Route 7 anymore. I know someone deleted that call, Della said. I've known it for 2 years. What I didn't know was that it happened to anyone else. It happened to at least 4 people that I can identify, I said. And the boot I found in the tunnel suggests it may have happened to at least one more. What boot? I told her about the boot. The line was quiet for a long time. My daughter lost her shoes in there, Della said. Her sneakers. They were never found. Where are they? In the water, she said. They came off in the water. But there's no water. There's never any water when anyone goes to check. Saturday afternoon. Cheryl's kitchen table. Cheryl, Roy, Della on speakerphone, and me. The 4 of us, or 5 counting Ellis, who was at Mom's house and did not want to come but had permitted me to share his account. I'd written everything down in the notebook from the Dollar General. I'd organized it chronologically. I'd cross-referenced the phone records that Cheryl and Della had in hand. Roy's Verizon records would take a few days, but he'd confirmed the call from memory, and I trusted his account. Here is what we had. 4 911 calls were placed about the Blackwater Tunnel between 2019 and 2025. All 4 completed. All 4 were received by Tucker County Dispatch. All 4 resulted in a promise that someone would be sent. No one was sent in any of the 4 cases. None of the 4 calls appeared in the county's dispatch log. All 4 incidents involved people entering the tunnel and experiencing something that in some form included water. Deep, cold water that was not present when the tunnel was subsequently examined. All 4 people came out alive but altered. Gavin Mans lost the ability to describe his experience. Roy Pruitt lost 7 hours. Madison Simmons was hypothermic in the summer. Ellis had a concussion and a story about drowning that he'd preemptively edited into a version a doctor would accept. One boot, unmatched, suggested a 5th person, maybe more. And all of this had been kept invisible by a man whose wife's family had a financial interest in preventing the county from looking at the tunnel too closely. I need to pause here and say something about what I believed and what I didn't. I have seen the way this kind of story gets told on the internet. The tunnel becomes the monster. The water becomes the mystery. People start talking about portals and dimensions, and the tunnel as a liminal space or a thin place, or whatever language the internet uses for we don't understand this and we'd rather it be supernatural than boring. I want to be very clear about what I believed then and what I believe now. I believed, and I believe, that Blackwater Tunnel sits above or intersects an unmapped subsurface water feature. A seasonal aquifer, an intermittent spring, a karst channel. Something geological that produces flooding inside the tunnel under specific groundwater conditions and drains away when those conditions change. Tucker County is in the Allegheny Plateau. The underlying geology is layered sedimentary rock, sandstone, shale, and limestone. Karst features are common throughout the region. Springs appear and disappear. Sinkholes open in fields. Water moves through this landscape in ways that are not always visible on the surface and not always documented on geological surveys. I believed, and I believe, that people entered that tunnel during active flooding episodes and experienced exactly what they described: cold, deep, fast-moving water in total darkness. The terror of that experience, combined with the sensory deprivation of absolute darkness and the physiological effects of cold water immersion, would be more than sufficient to explain the memory disruption, the confusion, the hypothermia, and the perceived duration distortion that Roy experienced. I believed, and I believe, that Dale Reese knew about the flooding, whether he knew because he'd been in the tunnel himself, or because someone had told him, or because the engineering implications of the tunnel's location were obvious to anyone who'd spent 30 years in emergency services in a county built on limestone. I don't know, but he knew. And he knew that if the calls stayed in the record would eventually force action. And action would force visibility, and visibility would end Connor Voss's plan to get the easement cleared. So he deleted the calls. Not because he was evil, because he was a man with a login and a family obligation, and a very small, very human calculation about whose interests mattered more, the people who might wander into a closed tunnel or the people at his Thanksgiving table. That is not a supernatural story. That is a county government story. It is the most common horror in America. The one where the infrastructure is fine, and the people running it have simply decided that your emergency is not their problem. On Sunday, I did something I'd been putting off. I went back to the tunnel, not inside. I went back to the pull-off on Route 7, in daylight, and I walked the perimeter. I walked the access road from the pull-off to the eastern portal. I examined the gate, cut open, rusted, hanging by one hinge. I walked the hillside above the tunnel, following the ridgeline where the bore runs underneath. The ground above was unremarkable. Leafless hardwoods, last year's dead leaves, a few exposed rock ledges, no obvious sinkholes, no visible springs. But the geology was there if you knew what to look for. The sandstone on the ridge face was streaked with mineral deposits, iron oxide calcite, which meant water had been moving through it for a long time. The seams between strata were dark, which meant they were wet. In February, with the water table high from snowmelt and rain, the subsurface was saturated. I walked back to the portal. I stood at the mouth and pointed my flashlight inside. The floor was dry. The walls were damp but not flowing. The air coming out was cold and smelled like stone. 1,100 feet of darkness ahead of me, and somewhere in that darkness, a boot that belonged to a person nobody was looking for. I didn't go in. On Monday morning, I drove to the Tucker County Courthouse in Parsons. I knew what I needed because I had spent 11 years reading county filings and understanding what they're supposed to contain, what they actually contain, and what the gap between those two things means. I went to the FOIA office, which in Tucker County is a desk in the clerk's office occupied part-time by a woman named Shonda Patterson, who also handles marriage licenses and notary requests, and I filed 2 requests. The first was for all dispatch records related to Blackwater Tunnel, the Route 7 pull-off, and the Norfolk Southern Spur line from January 2014 to the present. I phrased this broadly because I wanted to catch anything coded by location, by landmark, or by the road address. The second was for the supervisory audit log of the county's CAD system for the same date range. The second request is the one that mattered, and I need to explain why. Computer-aided dispatch systems, even old ones, even the cheap ones that rural counties run on because they can't afford anything else, have an audit function. It's a basic accountability feature. Anytime a user with administrative access modifies, reclassifies, or deletes a record, the system logs the action. It records the date, the time, the user ID, the original record category, and the action taken. The purpose is to prevent exactly what Dale Reese had been doing. The audit log exists because the system designers knew that someone, someday, would misuse their access, and the log would be the evidence trail. Dale Reese either didn't know the audit log existed, or he assumed nobody would ever ask for it. In a county where the FOIA officer is also the marriage license clerk and the annual volume of public records requests is probably in the single digits, that was not an unreasonable assumption. Nobody had ever asked. Cheryl hadn't known to ask. Della's lawyer hadn't known to ask. Roy hadn't even tried. But I process government documents for a living. I know what audit logs are. I know they exist. and I know how to request them. The FOIA response was due in 5 business days under West Virginia law. I filed the request, got a stamped receipt from Shonda, and left. At 2:15 p.m. that same day, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, 304 area code. I picked up. Ms. Fenton, this is Dale Reese. I'm the emergency management coordinator for Tucker County. His voice was warm, calm, avuncular. The voice of a man who has spent 3 decades being the helpful, trustworthy face of county government. He sounded like every competent, friendly bureaucrat I've ever worked with, and I've worked with hundreds. He said he understood I'd had a scare with my brother, and he was glad Alice was okay. He said he'd heard I'd been asking around about the tunnel. He said he wanted to make sure I had accurate information. The tunnel's been closed for a long time, he said. People go in there, they get hurt. It's a liability issue the county is aware of. We've been trying to get the funding to properly seal it. I let him talk. I am good at letting people talk. In my job, I have sat through 3-hour public hearings where landowners told me everything they knew about a property while trying to tell me nothing, and I have learned that the most useful information comes from the parts they think are filler. I appreciate that. I said, "Can you explain to me why my 911 call from Tuesday night isn't in the dispatch log?" A pause. Not long. 2 seconds. "I'm sorry. I called 911 on Tuesday night from the Route 7 pull-off. I reported my brother missing. The call was completed. 3 minutes, 20 seconds. When I checked with Deputy Walters the next day, there was no record. CAD systems drop calls sometimes. It's an old system. We've been requesting upgrade funding from the Commission for years. Is it also the reason there's no record of the 911 call Marcus Manns placed in 2019 about his son Gavin?" A longer pause. 4 seconds. I counted. "I'm not sure where you're getting that information," he said. Phone records. The caller's phone records show completed calls to 911. The county's logs show nothing. I've found 4 instances. Ms. Fenton, I think you're dealing with a lot of stress right now. Your mother's estate, your brother's situation. I understand that. But I'd encourage you not to pursue a narrative that's going to cause problems for people who are just trying to do their jobs. There it was. The pivot. The gentle, practiced redirection from "let me help you understand" to "let me help you understand that you're being unreasonable." I have heard this pivot in 100 different contexts. From developers, from attorneys, from agency directors who don't want a permit application to become a headline. It always sounds the same. It always sounds like concern. "I've filed a FOIA request for the CAD audit log," I said. If the calls were dropped by the system, there won't be any supervisory level deletions in the log. If they were deleted by a user, there will be, and a user ID will be attached. The silence that followed was the longest one. 5 seconds. 6. 7. "You do that, Miss Fenton," he said. And he hung up. I sat in my mother's kitchen, and my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from recognition. I knew that voice. I knew the texture of that conversation. It was the voice of a man who had done this before. Not this specific conversation, but this category of conversation, the one where someone gets closey, and you talk them back to a safe distance. He had done it to Cheryl, probably, or to someone like Cheryl. He had done it to Della's lawyer in some version. He had learned, over years of doing it, exactly how much warmth and exactly how much warning to put into his voice to make a reasonable person feel unreasonable. But I was not a person he could talk to at a safe distance, because I was not relying on his system for my evidence. I was relying on his system's own memory of what he had done to it. The next 4 days were the longest wait of my life, and I filled them by being thorough. I drove back to Cheryl's. We sat at her table E, and I explained what the audit log was and what I expected it to show. She made coffee. Roy came over. He'd gotten his Verizon records, a printout showing a completed call to Tucker County 911 on October 14, 2021, at 9:47 p.m., duration 2 minutes 50 seconds. Della emailed me her phone records and her lawyer's correspondence with the county commission. I organized everything into a timeline. I made copies. I put the copies in a second manila folder and gave that folder to Cheryl with instructions to keep it somewhere that was not her house. "If something happens to my copies, yours still exist." I said, "You think he'd do that?" I think he deleted 4 911 calls. I think removing paper is something he's comfortable with. On Tuesday, I asked Cheryl if I could meet Gavin. She was hesitant, She said he didn't talk about the tunnel. I said I understood that, and I wasn't going to ask him to relive it. I said I had one question, just one, and it would take 30 seconds, and I would leave. She called me back that evening and said to come by on Wednesday afternoon. Gavin Mans was 23 years old, built like a linebacker working on a dirt bike engine in the open garage attached to his mother's house. He had grease on his hands and a ball cap pushed back on his head, and he shook my hand with the firm, brief grip of someone who has been told to be polite but would rather be left alone. He had clear eyes. He was present. Nothing about him in that moment suggested that he'd been through anything unusual. I stood in the garage, and I said, "Gavin, I'm not going to ask you to talk about the tunnel. I just want to ask you one thing, and then I'll go." He nodded. "When you were in the tunnel, was there water?" His hand stopped. He was holding a socket wrench over the engine block, CKA, and his hands just stopped, suspended, like someone had pressed pause. He didn't look at me. He looked at the engine. The wrench trembled slightly in his grip. "I can't talk about the tunnel," he said. His voice was steady, but the words came out with effort, like each one had to be pushed through a narrow opening. "I'm not asking you to describe what happened. I'm asking one factual question. Was there water?" "Up to my neck," he said. He set the wrench down carefully on the workbench. He turned around and walked into the house without another word. The screen door closed behind him. Through the window, I could see him standing in the kitchen with his hands on the counter, his head down. Cheryl was in the doorway. She looked at me, and then she looked at her son through the window, and then she looked back at me. "He's never said that before," she said. "He's never been able to say anything about it." I think the question helped. A specific question, instead of an open one, it gave him a door small enough to walk through. "Up to his neck," Cheryl said, almost to herself. My God, he was 17. I left. I drove back to Blackwater. I sat with Ellis on the porch and told him what Gavin had said. Ellis was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It was cold enough that I thought my heart was going to stop." You know that feeling when you jump into a cold lake and your chest seizes. It was like that, except there was no surface. There was no direction. Just water and dark. I know, I don't mean that to be harsh. But you don't, and I hope you never do. We sat on the porch and listened to the hollow. Somewhere far up the ridge, a barred owl called, "Who cooks for you? Who cooks for you all?" And another answered from across the drainage. And for a few minutes the only sound in the world was two owls talking to each other across a valley that had no idea what was underneath it. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I waited. I also did two more things that I think mattered. On Thursday, I drove to the Tucker County Commission office in Parsons and requested a meeting with the commission chair, Gary Long. The receptionist told me he was unavailable. I left my name and number. I said it was regarding a public safety concern related to the Blackwater Tunnel. She wrote it down. Gary Long did not return my call. On Friday, I called the Elkins Intermountain, which is the regional newspaper that covers Tucker and Randolph counties. I asked to speak with whoever covered the Tucker County government. They connected me with a reporter named Abigail Kaufman. She was 26. She'd been covering county commission meetings for 2 years. She had the slightly bored, slightly eager voice of someone who had been waiting for a real story to break the monotony of zoning variances and road paving budgets. I told her what I had. I told her I could not yet prove it. I told her the FOIA response was due Monday, and that I believed it would contain the proof. She asked me to call her the moment I had it. The FOIA response arrived on Monday at 11:20 a.m. by email from Shonda Patterson. The subject line was, "FOIA response, Fenton request number 2025014." The first attachment was the dispatch log extract. I opened it and scrolled through 6 years of records. Not a single entry referenced Blackwater Tunnel, Route 7, or the Norfolk Southern Spur. This was expected. If Dale had done what I believed he'd done, the active log would be clean. The second attachment was the audit log. It was a spreadsheet, 23 rows covering the 6-year date range. Most were routine. Test calls voided during system maintenance, duplicate entries cleaned up, and a few misdials reclassified. Standard data hygiene. I went through them one by one. Row 7, November 3, 2019. Call category, missing person. Action, void supervisor. User ID, 3's admin. Timestamp of void, November 4th, 2019, 2:14 a.m., approximately 28 hours after the call was placed. Row 12, October 15th, 2021. Call category, Animal Rescue/General Assist. Action, Void Supervisor. User ID Dries Admin. Timestamp, October 16th, 2021, 11:47 p.m. Row 17, July 22nd, 2023. Call category, Missing Person. Action, Void Supervisor. User ID 3's Admin. Timestamped, July 23, 2023, 3:08 a.m. Row 21, February 25, 2025. Call category, Missing Person. Action, Void Supervisor. User ID RESE. Timestamp, February 26, 2025, 1:33 a.m. 4 calls, 4 voids. The same user ID for everyone. Dries Admin. Dale Reese had logged into the county's dispatch system within 48 hours of each call and manually voided the record. The system had watched him do it every time. It had recorded his user ID, the date, the time, and the category of the call he was erasing. The audit log was the memory the system kept of its own betrayal, sitting quietly in a database that nobody had ever asked to see. I called Cheryl. I called Della. I called Roy. I told each of them what the audit log showed. I told each of them I was going to the newspaper, to the county commission, and to the state. Then I called Abigail Kaufman. Abigail drove to Blackwater that afternoon. She sat at Cheryl's kitchen table and I laid out everything. The timeline, the phone records, the FOIA response, the audit log. She recorded the conversation on her phone with everyone's consent. She called Della, who gave a statement on the record. She called Roy, who gave a statement on the record. She asked if Ellis would speak. I called him. He said yes. He gave her a statement that included the water, the darkness, and the fact that he'd told the hospital a simpler version because the real one wasn't something a doctor could treat. Abigail asked if I had tried to reach Dale Reese for comment. I told her about the phone call. She said she'd reach out to him directly. I gave her his number. She also called the county commission office and left a message for Gary Long requesting comment on the FOIA findings. On Wednesday, I emailed the complete documentation, FOIA response, audit log, phone records, written accounts from all 4 families, to 4 recipients: the Tucker County Commission, the Tucker County Prosecuting Attorney's Office, the West Virginia Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, which oversees county emergency management coordinators, and the West Virginia Ethics Commission. I did not email Dale Reese. I was done talking to Dale Reese. On Friday, the Intermountain published Abigail Kaufman's story. Front page, above the fold. The headline read, Tucker County official allegedly deleted 911 records tied to closed tunnel. The story was thorough. It was factual. It is named Dale Reese. It is named Connor Voss and the mineral rights. It quoted Cheryl Manns, Roy Pruitt, Della Simmons, and Ellis Fenton. It reproduced the relevant rows of the audit log. It included a response from Dale Reese, obtained through his attorney, which stated that the voided records were standard data hygiene consistent with CAD system maintenance protocols, and that any suggestion of intentional suppression of emergency communications is categorically false. It included a statement from the County Commission Chair Gary Long, which said the Commission takes all public safety concerns seriously and is reviewing the matter. It did not include a comment from Connor Voss, because Connor Voss did not respond to Abigail's calls. On Monday of the following week, the Tucker County Commission held an emergency session. I attended. Cheryl attended. Roy attended. The room was small. The commission meets in a converted conference room on the 2nd floor of the courthouse, and there were maybe 30 people there, which is a full house by Tucker County standards. Gary Long sat at the center of the 3-person commission table and read a prepared statement announcing that Dale Reese had been placed on paid administrative leave pending a formal review of the dispatch records and the audit log findings. I stood up during public comment. I identified myself. I read a statement I'd written at my mother's kitchen table the night before. I described what had happened to Ellis. I described the 4 voided calls. I described the boot. I asked the commission to order an immediate engineering assessment of Blackwater Tunnel, including a hydrological survey of the subsurface water features in the vicinity. Cheryl stood up after me. She described what had happened to Gavin. She described the 6 years she'd spent being told that her husband's 911 call never happened. She asked the commission why a mother's phone bill was more reliable than the county's own emergency system. Roy stood up after Cheryl. He said less. He said he'd gone into the tunnel after his dog and lost 7 hours, and he'd been told by the county that his call for help never existed. And he'd believed them because why would he not believe them? They were the county. Della was not there in person. She'd submitted a written statement that was read into the record by the commission clerk. The commission voted 3-0 to authorize an engineering assessment of Blackwater Tunnel and to refer the audit log findings to the prosecuting attorney and the state DHSM. The engineering team arrived the following Thursday. They were a 3-person crew from a firm in Morgantown that the county contracted for infrastructure assessments. They spent 2 days in and around the tunnel with instruments I didn't recognize, and a report format I understood perfectly because I've read hundreds of reports exactly like it in my work at DEQ. Their preliminary finding, presented to the commission in an open session the following Tuesday, was this: Blackwater Tunnel intersects an unmapped seasonal aquifer at approximately 400 to 500 feet from the eastern portal. The aquifer is fed by a karst drainage system in the limestone strata beneath the sandstone cap of the ridge. Under certain conditions, saturated soil, high water table, specific barometric pressure patterns, the aquifer discharges into the tunnel bore through fissures in the floor and lower walls. The resulting flooding can reach depths of 3 to 5 feet within the tunnel in a matter of minutes and can recede within hours as the aquifer drains through downstream karst channels. 3 to 5 feet. Chest deep on a short person. Neck deep in as a teenager. The report noted that the flooding was intermittent and unpredictable, without continuous monitoring equipment, which had never been installed. It noted that the tunnel had no lighting, no signage, no emergency communication infrastructure, and no functional barrier to entry. It recommended immediate closure and sealing of both portals, installation of groundwater monitoring equipment, and a full hydrological survey of the karst system feeding the aquifer. The report also noted, in a paragraph near the end that I've read a dozen times, the presence of miscellaneous personal effects on the tunnel floor, including one men's leather work boot. Left foot, no identifying markings. Logged as item hash BWT 2025001. The boot is in the record now. It has a number. It is in the system. I don't know what will happen to Dale Reese. The state DHSEM has opened a formal inquiry. The prosecuting attorney is reviewing whether the voiding of dispatch records constitutes a criminal act under West Virginia Code or merely an administrative violation. Dale's attorney is mounting the defense I expected. Standard procedure, system maintenance, no malicious intent. The county commission may accept that. They appointed him. They reappointed him 3 times. They have their own exposure to consider. Connor Voss has not commented. The mineral rights are still registered. The easement question is now formally open because the county has been forced to acknowledge the tunnel as an active concern, which is exactly what he and Dale spent a decade trying to prevent. Ellis is still in Blackwater. He's staying through the end of the month. We're finishing the estate. We've packed most of the house. The kitchen is mostly bare now. The cast iron is in a box in Ellis's truck because we decided to keep it after all. The faucet still drips. I haven't fixed it either. He doesn't go near the tunnel. He drives the long way around on Route 32 to avoid passing the pull-off on Route 7. He flinches when the kitchen faucet runs too long. At night sometimes I hear him get up and stand in the hallway, and I know he's listening for water. There is no water, but the sound of it is inside him now, and I don't think it's going to leave. I need to say something about the boot, because the boot is the thing that won't resolve E, and I've decided to stop pretending it will. The engineering team logged it. The sheriff's office collected it as part of what they're calling a preliminary inquiry into potential unreported incidents at the Blackwater Tunnel site. Preliminary inquiry. That means they're looking, but slowly, and with the institutional reluctance of a department that is not eager to discover that someone went into a tunnel on their watch and never came out. The boot is a size 11 Danner. Danners are not uncommon in Tucker County. They're a work boot. Loggers wear them. Construction workers wear them, and anyone who needs a solid boot and can afford one wears them. There is no DNA on file to match, no missing person report that corresponds, and no name. It is a boot without a person. But there was a person. Someone walked into that tunnel wearing those boots and, at some point, stopped wearing them. Maybe they were in the water, the way Ellis was in the water, the way Gavin was in the water. Their boots came off the way Madison's sneakers came off, and Ellis's sneakers came off. Maybe they walked out the other side, barefoot, disoriented, and found their way home and never told anyone because who would believe them? Or maybe they didn't walk out. I don't know. I don't have enough information. And this is not a story where I'm going to pretend that the mystery resolves cleanly, because the audience wants closure. The boot is an open question. It may always be an open question. Dale Reese's audit log shows 4 deleted calls. There may be calls from before 2019 that the system's audit retention doesn't cover. There may be calls that were intercepted before they were even logged, though I have no evidence of that. And I'm not going to speculate beyond what the data supports. What I can tell you is this. The record is no longer incomplete in the ways it was incomplete 3 weeks ago. 4 calls have been restored to institutional memory. 4 families have documentation that their emergencies were real, and their evidence was deliberately suppressed. A newspaper has printed the story. A state agency is investigating. The tunnel has been assessed. The aquifer has been identified. The boot has been logged. I filed a formal complaint with the West Virginia Ethics Commission against Dale Reese on March 9th. The complaint is a matter of public record. Anyone can request it. Anyone can read it. I'm writing this in my mother's kitchen, on what I think is my last night in this house. Ellis and I are meeting the realtor tomorrow. The house will be listed by the end of the week. I'll drive back to Charlottesville. I'll go back to my desk at DEQ. I'll process permit applications. I'll check documents for missing pages. But I'm not writing this from inside a silence. I'm not holding a secret. I'm not standing outside a system that failed, watching it from a distance carrying knowledge that nobody else has. 4 families know each other's names. Cheryl and Roy and Della and Ellis and me. We are in the record, named on the front page of a newspaper, in a FOIA response, in a state file. The truth is not mine alone, and it is not fragile. It is distributed across enough places and enough people that no single administrator with a login can reach all of it. Dale Reese spent 13 years making Blackwater Tunnel invisible. He did it by removing records one at a time from a system that trusts its operators. He did it because a family member needed the tunnel to not be a problem, and because the people who went into it were not important enough in his calculation to outweigh that need. Every time someone called for help, he let the call happen, let the promise of response be made, and then reached into the machine afterward and pulled the call out like a weed. He trusted that the callers would doubt themselves. He trusted that the county would not check its own audit log. He trusted that the people of Tucker County would do what people in small, tired counties always do, accept the official record and move on. He was right about that for 6 years. He was right until a woman who reads county filings for a living came back to bury her mother and found her brother's truck with the door open and a boot in a tunnel that shouldn't have had a boot in it. I did not uncover this because I'm brave. I uncovered it because my brother almost died. And I was angry, wry, and I know how to read an audit log. That's not heroism. That's professional competence applied to a personal crisis. Cheryl Manns knew something was wrong for 6 years before I showed up. She's the one who said Dale Reese's name out loud to a stranger in a pizza shop. Roy Pruitt sat in his farmhouse for 3 years, thinking he'd had a stress episode because the county told him his 911 call never happened. Della Simmons moved to a different town because she couldn't stand the drive. These people were not waiting for me to save them. They were waiting for someone to believe them, and the system that should have believed them was being operated by a man who needed them not to be believed. That is the story. Not the tunnel, not the water, not the boot. The story is that a man had administrative access to the record of human distress and used it to protect a real estate transaction. And that the people whose distress he erased eventually found each other because one of them worked at a pizza shop and asked the right question on the right day. The tunnel is being sealed. The aquifer is being mapped. The boot is being investigated. The record is being rebuilt. I'm going home. But I want to say one more thing, and then I'll stop. On my last visit to Cheryl's house, I asked her something that had been bothering me. I asked her why she'd spoken to me at all. I was a stranger. I'd walked into her pizza shop and ordered 2 slices, and she'd volunteered the most painful story of her life to someone she hadn't seen since I was a child. She thought about it. She said, "Because you had the look." What look? The one where you've just found out the system doesn't work, and you don't know what to do with that yet. Gavin had that look when he came back. Your brother probably has it too. I've been watching for that look for 6 years. You're the first person I've seen it on who I thought might actually do something about it. I don't know if I've done enough. The commission may protect Dale. The prosecutor may decline charges. The tunnel may be sealed, and the whole thing may become a paragraph in a newspaper archive that nobody reads. The boot may never be matched. But the record exists. It cannot be voided. It is in 4 families' file cabinets, and a reporter's notes, and a state agency's intake file, and the public comment minutes of a county commission meeting, and the stamped receipt of a FOIA request that Shonda Patterson processed without being told. To look the other way, because nobody told her to, because Dale Reese never imagined the audit log would be the thing that undid him. The last 911 call from Blackwater Tunnel was never logged, but the people who made it, all of them, every one, are in the record now. And the record is not his anymore.